Chapter 27, Part 2 of Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie K. Rose. Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times by François Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 27, The Wars of Italy, Louis XII, 1498 to 1515, Part 2. Whilst matters were thus going on in the north of Italy, Louis XII was preparing for his second great Italian venture, the conquest of the kingdom of Naples, in which his predecessor Charles VIII had failed. He thought to render the enterprise easier by not bearing the whole burden by himself alone. On the 11th of November, 1500, he concluded at Granada with Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Castile and Aragon, a treaty by which the kings of France and Spain divided, by anticipation, between them the kingdom of Naples, which they were making an engagement to conquer together. Terra de Lavoro and the province of the Abruzzi, with the cities of Naples and Gaeta, were to be the share of Louis XII, who would assume the title of King of Naples and of Jerusalem. Calabria and Puglia, Apulia, with the title of duchies, would belong to the King of Spain, to whom Louis XII, in order to obtain this chance of an accessory and precarious kingship, gave up entirely Roussillon and Cerdagne, that French frontier of the Pyrenees, which Louis XI had purchased, a golden bargain, from John II, King of Aragon. In this arrangement there was a blemish and a danger of which the superficial and reckless policy of Louis XII made no account. He did not here, as he had done for the conquest of Milaness, join himself to an ally of far inferior power to his own, and of ambition confined within far narrower boundaries, as was the case when the Venetians supported him against Ludovic Sforza. He was choosing for his comrade, in a far greater enterprise, his nearest and most powerful rival, and the most dexterous rascal amongst the kings of his day. "The King of France," said Ferdinand one day, "complains that I have deceived him twice. He lies, the drunkard. I have deceived him more than 10 times. Whether this barefaced language were or were not really used, it expressed nothing but the truth. Mediocre men, who desire to remain pretty nearly honest, have always the worst of it, and are always dupes when they ally themselves with men who are corrupt and at the same time able, indifferent to good and evil, to justice and iniquity. Louis XII, even with the Cardinal d'Amboise to advise him, was neither sufficiently judicious to abstain from madly conceived enterprises, nor sufficiently scrupulous and clear-sighted to unmask and play off every act of perfidy and wickedness. By uniting himself, for the conquest and partition of the kingdom of Naples, with Ferdinand the Catholic, he was bringing upon himself, first of all, hidden opposition in the very midst of joint action, and afterwards open treason and defection. He forgot, moreover, that Ferdinand had at the head of his armies a tried chieftain, Gonzalvo of Cordova, already known throughout Europe as the Great Captain, who had won that name in campaigns against the Moors, the Turks, and the Portuguese, and who had the character of being as free from scruple as from fear. Lastly, the supporters who, at the very commencement of his enterprises in Italy, had been sought and gained by Louis XII, Pope Alexander VI and his son Caesar Borgia, were as little to be depended upon in the future as they were compromising at the present, by reason of their reputation for unbridled ambition, perfidy, and crime. The King of France, whatever sacrifices he might already have made and might still make in order to ensure their cooperation, could no more count upon it than upon the loyalty of the King of Spain in the conquest they were entering upon together. The outset of the campaign was attended with easy success. The French army, under the command of Stuart d'Aubigny, a valiant Scot, arrived on the 25th of June, 1501, before Rome, and there received a communication, in the form of a bull of the Pope, which removed the crown of Naples from the head of Frederick III, and partitioned that fief of the Holy See between the kings of France and Spain. Fortified with this authority, the army continued its march, and arrived before Capua on the 6th of July. Gonzalvo of Cordova was already upon Neapolitan territory with a Spanish army, which Ferdinand the Catholic had hastily sent thither at the request of Frederick III himself, who had counted upon the assistance of his cousin, the King of Aragon, against the French invasion. Great was his consternation when he heard that the ambassadors of France and Spain had proclaimed at Rome the alliance between their masters. At the first rumor of this news, Gonzalvo of Cordova, whether sincerely or not, treated it as calumny. But, so soon as its certainty was made public, he accepted it without hesitation, and took, equally with the French, the offensive against the king, already dethroned by the Pope, and very near being so by the two sovereigns who had made alliance for the purpose of sharing between them the spoil they should get from him. Capua capitulated, and was nevertheless plundered and laid waste. A French fleet, commanded by Philip de Ravenstein, arrived off Naples when d'Aubigny was already master of it. The unhappy King Frederick took refuge in the island of Ischia, and, unable to bear the idea of seeking an asylum in Spain with his cousin, who had betrayed him so shamefully, he begged the French admiral himself to advise him in his adversity. As enemies that have the advantage should show humanity to the afflicted, Ravenstein sent word to him, he would willingly advise him as to his affairs. According to his advice, the best thing would be to surrender and place himself in the hands of the King of France, and submit to his good pleasure. He would find him so wise and so debonair and so accommodating that he would be bound to be content. Better or safer counsel for him he had not to give. After taking some precautions on the score of his eldest son, Prince Ferdinand, whom he left at Tarento, in the kingdom he was about to quit, Frederick III followed Ravenstein's counsel, sent to ask for a young gentleman to be his guide to France, put to sea with 500 men remaining to him, and arrived at Marseilles, whither Louis XII sent some lords of his court to receive him. 2 months afterwards, and not before, he was conducted to the king himself, who was then at Blois. Louis welcomed him with his natural kindness, and secured to him 50,000 livres a year on the Duchy of Anjou, on the condition that he never left France. It does not appear that Frederick ever had an idea of doing so, for his name is completely lost to history up to the day of his death, which took place at Tours on the 9th of November 1504, after 3 years' oblivion and exile. On hearing of so prompt a success, Louis XII's satisfaction was great. He believed, and many others no doubt believed with him, that his conquest of Naples, of that portion at least which was assigned to him by his treaty with the King of Spain, was accomplished. The Senate of Venice sent to him, in December 1501, a solemn embassy to congratulate him. In giving the Senate an account of his mission, one of the ambassadors, Dominic of Treviso, drew the following portrait of Louis XII. The king is in stature tall and thin, and temperate in eating, taking scarcely anything but boiled beef. He is by nature miserly and retentive. His great pleasure is hawking, and from September to April he hawks. The Cardinal of Rouen, Georges d'Amboise, does everything, nothing, however, without the cognizance of the king, who has a far from stable mind, saying yes and no. I am of opinion that their lordships should remove every suspicion from his Majesty's mind, and aim at keeping themselves closely united with him. Armand Bachet, La Diplomatique, n'en est rien, page 362. It was not without ground that the Venetian envoy gave his government this advice. So soon as the treaty of alliance between Louis XII and the Venetians for the conquest of Milaness had attained its end, the king had more than once felt and testified some displeasure at the demeanor assumed towards him by his former allies. They had shown vexation and disquietude at the extension of French influence in Italy, and they had addressed to Louis certain representations touching the favor enjoyed at his hands by the Pope's nephew, Cesar Borgia, to whom he had given the title of Duke of Valentinois, on investing him with the countships of Valence and of Die in Dauphiny. Louis, on his side, showed anxiety as to the conduct which would be exhibited towards him by the Venetians if he encountered any embarrassment in his expedition to Naples. Nothing of the kind happened to him during the first month after King Frederick III's abandonment of the kingdom of Naples. The French and the Spaniards, d'Aubigny and Gonzalvo of Cordova, at first gave their attention to nothing but establishing themselves firmly, each in the interests of the king his master, in those portions of the kingdom which were to belong to them. But, before long, disputes arose between the two generals as to the meaning of certain clauses in the treaty of November 11th, 1500, and as to the demarcation of the French and Spanish territories. D'Aubigny fell ill, and Louis XII sent to Naples, with the title of Viceroy, Louis d'Armagnac, Duke of Nemours, a brave warrior, but a negotiator inclined to take umbrage and to give offense. The disputes soon took the form of hostilities. The French essayed to drive the Spaniards from the points they had occupied in the disputed territories, and at first they had the advantage. Gonzalvo of Cordova, from necessity or imprudence, concentrated his forces within Barletta, a little fortress with a little port on the Adriatic. But there he endured, from July 1502 to April 1503, a siege which did great honor to the patient firmness of the Spanish troops and the persistent vigor of their captain. Gonzalvo was getting ready to sally from Barletta and take the offensive against the French, when he heard that a treaty signed at Lyons on the 5th of April 1503, between the kings of Spain and France, made a change in the position reciprocally of the two sovereigns, and must suspend the military operations of their generals within the kingdom of Naples. The French general declared his readiness to obey his king, said Guicciardini. But the Spanish, whether it were that he felt sure of victory, or that he had received private instructions on that point, said that he could not stop the war without express orders from his king. And, sallying forthwith from Barletta, he gained on the 28th of April, 1503, at Cerignola, a small town of Puglia, a signal victory over the French commanded by the Duke of Nemours, who, together with 3,000 men of his army, was killed in action. The very day after his success, Gonzalvo heard that a Spanish corps, lately disembarked in Calabria, had also beaten, on the 21st of April, at Seminara, a French corps commanded by d'Aubigny. The great captain was as eager to profit by victory as he had been patient in waiting for a chance of it. He marched rapidly on Naples, and entered it on the 14th of May, almost without resistance. And the two forts defending the city, the Castel Nuovo and the Castel del Uovo, surrendered, one on the 11th of June and the other on the 1st of July. The capital of the kingdom having thus fallen into the hands of the Spaniards, Capua and Aversa followed its example. Gaeta was the only important place which still held out for the French, and contained a garrison capable of defending it, and thither the remnant of the troops beaten at Seminara and at Cerignola had retired. Louis XII hastened to levy and send to Italy, under the command of Louis de la Tremoille, a fresh army for the purpose of relieving Gaeta and recovering Naples. But at Parma La Tremoille fell ill, so crushed by his malady and so despairing of life, says his chronicler John Boucher, that the physician sent word to the king that it was impossible in the way of nature to recover him, and that without the divine assistance he could not get well. The command devolved upon the Marquis of Mantua, who marched on Gaeta. He found Gonzalvo of Cordova posed with his army on the left bank of the Garigliano, either to invest the place or to repulse reinforcements that might arrive for it. The two armies passed 50 days face to face almost, with the river and its marshes between them, vainly attempting over and over to join the battle. Some of Gonzalvo's officers advised him to fall back on Capua so as to withdraw his troops from an unhealthy and difficult position. But I would rather, said he, have here for my grave 6 feet of earth by pushing forward, than prolong my life 100 years by falling back, though it were but a few arms' lengths. The French army was dispersing about in search of shelter and provisions, and the Marquis of Mantua, disgusted with the command, resigned it to the Marquis of Saluzzo, and returned home to his marquisate. Gonzalvo, who was kept well informed of his enemy's condition, threw, on the 27th of December, a bridge over the Garigliano, attacked the French suddenly, and forced them to fall back upon Gaeta, which they did not succeed in entering until they had lost artillery, baggage, and a number of prisoners. The Spaniards, says John d'Auton, halted before the place, made as if they would lay siege to it, and so remained for 2 or 3 days. The French, who were there in great numbers, had scarcely any provisions, and could not hold out for long. However, they put a good face upon it. The captain, Gonzalvo, sent word to them that if they would surrender their town he would, on his part, restore to them without ransom all prisoners and others of their party. And he had many of them, James de la Palisse, Stuart d'Aubigny, Gaspard de Coligny, Anthony de Lafayette, etc., all captains. The French captains, seeing that fortune was not kind to them, and that they had provisions for a week only, were all for taking this offer. All the prisoners, captains, men-at-arms, and common soldiers were accordingly given up, put to sea, and sailed for Genoa, where they were well received and kindly treated by the Genoese, which did them great good, for they were much in need of it. Nearly all the captains died on their return, some of mourning over their losses, others of melancholy at their misfortune, others for fear of the king's displeasure, and others of sickness and weariness. At the news of these reverses, the grief and irritation of Louis XII were extreme. Not only was he losing his Neapolitan conquests, but even his Milaness was also threatened. The ill will of the Venetians became manifest. They had revictualled by sea the fortress of Barletta, in which Gonzalvo of Cordova had shut himself up with his troops. And when the king presented complaints of this succor afforded to his enemies, the Senate replied that the matter had taken place without their cognizance, that Venice was a republic of traders, and that private persons might very likely have sold provisions to the Spaniards, with whom Venice was at peace, without there being any ground for concluding from it that she had failed in her engagements toward France. Sometime afterwards, 4 French galleys, chased by a Spanish squadron of superior force, presented themselves before the port of Otranto, which was in the occupation of the Venetians, who pleaded their neutrality as a reason for refusing asylum to the French squadron, which the commander was obliged to set on fire, that it might not fall into the enemy's hands. The determined prosecution of hostilities in the kingdom of Naples by Gonzalo of Cordova, in spite of the treaty concluded at Lyons on the 5th of April, 1503, between the kings of France and Spain, was so much the more offensive to Louis XII. In that this treaty was the consequence and the confirmation of an enormous concession which he had 2 years previously made to the King of Spain on consenting to affiance his daughter, Princess Claude of France, 2 years old, to Ferdinand's grandson, Charles of Austria, who was then only 1 year old, and who became Charles V emperor. Lastly, about the same time, Pope Alexander VI., who had rendered Louis XII. So many services, died at Rome on the 12th of August, 1503. Louis had hoped that his favorite minister, Cardinal Georges d'Amboise, would succeed him, and that hope had a great deal to do with the shocking favor he showed Cesar Borgia, that infamous son of a demoralized father. But the candidature of Cardinal d'Amboise failed. A 4 weeks pope, Pius III., succeeded Alexander VI. And when the Holy See suddenly became once more vacant, Cardinal d'Amboise failed again. And the new choice was Cardinal Julian della Rovera, Pope Julius II., who soon became the most determined and most dangerous foe of Louis XII., already assailed by so many enemies. The Venetian Dominic of Treviso was quite right. Louis XII. Was of unstable mind, saying yes and no. On such characters, discouragement tells rapidly. In order to put off the struggle which had succeeded so ill for him in the kingdom of Naples, Louis concluded on the 31st of March, 1504, a truce for 3 years with the King of Spain, and on the 22nd of September in the same year, in order to satisfy his grudge on account of the Venetians' demeanor towards him, he made an alliance against them with Emperor Maximilian I. and Pope Julius II., with the design, all 3 of them, of wresting certain provinces from them. With those political miscalculations was connected a more personal and more disinterested feeling. Louis repented of having in 1501 affianced his daughter Claude to Prince Charles of Austria, and of the enormous concessions he had made by 2 treaties, one of April 5th, 1503, and the other of September 22nd, 1504, for the sake of this marriage. He had assigned as dowry to his daughter, first the Duchy of Milan, then the Kingdom of Naples, then Brittany, and then the Duchy of Burgundy and the Countship of Blois. The latter of these treaties contained even the following strange clause: if, by the default of the most Christian king, or of the queen his